Welcome, everyone, to another CTC Software webinar. My name is Sean Zerbis, the Director of BIM Development here at CTC Software, and today I'm excited to talk with you about a tool that we have that you probably don't know much about yet. It's the ROI Calculator that we offer on our site, and we're going to go over a comprehensive introduction today. Now, as usual, we're going to be going through and watching the questions and answers window. So if you've got questions while we're talking about these topics, I encourage you to jump in and ask them. Also, as always, we of course record our webinars. So you can always come back and watch this in the future and rewatch it if you want to see more about what it is we're talking about today. So with that, let's jump into the topic here. I mean, here at CTC, our goal is now and has always been your success. That's always been the goal. And a lot of the time, this turns into workflow development and crafting specific tools that are focused on helping you optimize your workflow. But beyond just workflow optimization, I want you to be able to understand how you can harness those tools, which ones are meaningful for you, where to focus your efforts. And so here today in this webinar, I'm going to kind of take a look, and actually in this whole series, I'm going to take a look at this ROI Calculator, this informational tool that's kind of baked into our website so that you can understand specific workflows where maybe you're not taking full advantage of the tools, or areas where you're trying to talk with your administration and show them like, yes, these tools are valuable. So this is sort of like a compass, right? It's going to like help you direct your efforts to identify specific areas where maybe you don't know you've got pain points yet, but there's a pain point that's there. And we want to show you how you can leverage these tools over the course of this entire series on how you can actually save time. So today is going to be focusing on the tool itself, the actual ROI calculator, and what it does for you. In future sessions, I'm going to be digging deep into specific workflows and highlighting the tools within those workflows to actually show them to you as it relates directly to the ROI itself. So first of all, we're going to identify some obstacles, and we're going to take a look at how we can, unlock some of the automation solutions that we offer, some of the tools that we offer. We're going to kind of talk a little bit about optimizing workflows kind of overall, and also how this can help you kind of revolutionize your workload as a whole. So we're going to kind of go over these things. Now, before I dig in deep, though, ROI really is it's kind of a financial term. It's a business analytic kind of metric. It's a key performance indicator, right? There's a lot of terms we use. And so what I want to do before we really dig into the ROI calculator itself is I want to talk about some key terms, some key industry terms in the area of finance that we can use so that we're kind of all speaking the same language here as I go through and talk about different aspects of the ROI, the return on investment generator, the tool itself. So for these key terms, the first thing I want to talk about is the term that we use in finance called spend. Now, a lot of us think this just means money coming out of our pocket, but really this is any resource that we're using to kind of satisfy some kind of immediate need. That could be time. I might spend my time doing something. I might spend my attention on something. I might spend money on something. And so whatever that resource is, I might spend my people's time, my employees' time doing something. Whatever that resource is that I'm spending, I'm throwing it at a problem. And typically, the solution for this spend has a return of sometime less than a year. That's a typical thing in the world of finance. There's sort of a related term to this, which is investment. Sometimes you just spend on something to solve a problem, and it's not necessarily it's not investing and giving you a return necessarily. It might be instant gratification. Like, I spend money on coffee because I really enjoy it. I'm not investing necessarily in coffee. It's not going to give me a return on that money that I'm throwing at that cup of coffee. An investment, though, is more where you're committing a resource, whether that be time or money or whatever, to generate some kind of future value. And this typically in the world of finance and investing means something that's going to return in more than a year. Now, we're not going to be talking about more than a year returns today. I just want to make sure that we're understanding like spend is like throwing something at a solution that's just right now immediate gratification, and the investment is throwing a resource at a solution that's going to give me a return in the future. And that brings us to this return, the return on investment, which is basically what you're gaining back from whatever that initial investment is. And this compares not to the spend, but to the what's called cost. And this is typically expressed as a percentage, and I'm not going to do that today. I'm going to express it in time and dollars. But this cost is another term, right? This is the resource that you're actually using to acquire something, whether it's a spend of that cost or whether it's an investment of that cost. This can be financial, we're talking about money usually, or this can be non-financial, again, in your time, your attention, other resources, whatever, right? That cost is a thing, whether you're bartering, whatever. So we're going to be talking about cost today, the cost of a tool, whether that be in time or money. There's also another thing that we talk about a lot in finance. It's called opportunity cost. And this one's really important. And I'm going to be referencing this one today as we go through the ROI generator, the return on investment. Opportunity cost is directly related to a return on investment. When you spend or when you take and you have a cost, whether that be an investment or a spend, whatever, there's a potential that you're sacrificing. If I spend my time on doing task A, that means I cannot spend that same time doing task B. I can't do two things simultaneously. There's a concept of multitasking. You're not really multitasking. You're just switching your time focus from one thing to another, and you're doing it rapidly, and you're being less efficient overall, I think. But that's an opinion, whatever. The opportunity cost, though, is the potential benefit you're getting by doing one thing or spending on one thing versus another. If I spend my time drafting today, that means I'm not necessarily spending my time, watching my kids' football game or whatever, right? Like I'm spending my time one way or the other, and there's an opportunity cost there where I'm not able to do something else, where I could have gotten a different return on that same investment or spend, right? That's an important thing. So could my time or my money have been better spent elsewhere? Could my employees' focus have been better spent elsewhere? Whatever that might be. We're going to be talking about that as it comes to the ROI calculator here in a minute. There's a couple of other terms. These are a little bit more obscure, but I want to throw them out there because I'm going to refer to them to some degree. So there's a payback period. So how long does it take for an investment to recover its initial cost? i.e., the return on your investment is what comes after the payback period. When I'm getting a return, when I'm making back more than I spent on something, that is after the payback period. So there's going to be an initial time where you're not yet getting a return. How long does that take? That's an important time to understand. If it's going to take me 6 years to get a return, is it worth it for that? That kind of affects my whole opportunity cost. In that 6 years, could I have done something else, right? There's a term called strategic alignment, ensuring that this investment, this time savings or monetary savings kind of aligns with everything else my organization's trying to do. So am I spending my time in the right places? That's an important thing. I'm not going to focus quite as much on that, but it's definitely a focus that does matter. There are oftentimes, along with an investment or a spend, some intangible benefits. In the case of the coffee example, I buy coffee because I love the flavor, but I get it's actually kind of a tangible benefit, but it's a side benefit of the caffeination boost, right? But there's other qualitative benefits that go sometimes beyond the initial return that can be really meaningful. And in the case of what I'm talking about today, it's just general employee morale in some cases. There's other things this could be, but that's the one that we see the most in our industry that I'm going to be talking about. There's a sustainability aspect here as well. What is the long-term impact of an investment? In the case of finance, that could mean like I retire earlier. In the case of a particular tool that I might be implementing or a workflow I might be implementing, that might mean I can take on, more projects. And how long can I sustain that? Is that going to be a long-term sustainable thing or not? Is it something that's going to give me a short return and then I can't keep doing it? Well, that's important to understand. There's one other term here called sunk cost that I want to mention. I think this is my last term. No, there's one more term after this, sunk cost. What this is anything that I've done before, there's past costs that I cannot in any way recover, and changing to a new system means that I potentially lose some of those past costs. And the important thing in the world of finance and investing is if you have this past thing that you were doing that you realize maybe wasn't the best way to do something, and you cut your losses and run, you can't be really considering those past costs into future investment decisions. That's an important thing. And I'll refer to some of that a little later on today. This sunk cost fallacy that we talk about, a lot of you probably don't realize this, but we use this on a regular basis in the phrase of because we've always done it that way. That's sort of a sunk cost fallacy. Just because you've always done it that way doesn't mean you should continue. We used to always walk everywhere we went, and now we've got horses. Well, we then got horses, right? Then we got cars, and now we've got airplanes, and that gives us greater reach. We didn't always fly. So just because there was a big investment in airplanes, right, that past cost, of, well, I used to always drive. Well, should I just continue driving, or should I take an airplane because it's more efficient? Now there's that sunk cost concept, right? So we use that a lot in our industry as well, and we're going to refer to that a little bit in some of these workflows that I'll reference today. The final topic here that I'm going to cover before we dig into the actual tool is a final term called hurdle rate that we use in finance. And this is, what is the minimum acceptable return on investment that's required for me to actually consider an investment in the first place? If we're talking about time, if I can save 5 hours of time every week, is that an acceptable hurdle rate? If I can save at least 5 hours of time, is that meaningful? If I can save at least 1 hour of time, is that meaningful? What is that rate at which I am willing to make a change to my workflow to get some kind of a return on my investment of time or money or whatever, okay? All of those are topics that we'll kind of be talking about today as we go through the return on investment calculator. And I may not use them directly, but I'm going to be referring to sort of their concepts as we go through some of the different workflows that we're going to kind of cover. I just want to make sure we got those out of the way here. So when we're talking about this return on investment calculator as it relates to CTC software, where is it? Where do I even find this thing? Because it's not like necessarily an installed tool that's on the ribbon. Where is this? So I'm going to show you exactly where this ROI calculator is, and I'm going to encourage you today to follow along. We're just talking in general certain workflows, so I'm not going to be digging into Revit directly. That's future webinars. This is a series of things. So we'll be talking about that in future sessions, but where is this? And then we're going to discuss right away, how do I use it? How do I use this ROI calculator? And we're going to go through a couple of examples today as well within the calculator of how you use it explicitly and some things you might want to consider as it relates to cost versus opportunity cost versus that whole return on investment and some of the hurdle costs and things like that. So let's jump in and actually take a look at this. I've got a web page pulled up here. This is a pretty common web page for us here at CTC Software because it's ctcsoftware.com. And everything that I'm going to cover today is directly available from the public portion of ctcsoftware.com. You do not have to be signed in to an official portal at all to get access to any individual specific tools. This is just public stuff. If you're viewing this and you're not yet a CTC customer, that's great. That's fine because I encourage you to use this ROI calculator anyway. It's free. It's just on the main site. So where do you go to find this? You're going to go here to resources. This resources drop down has a bunch of things. Blogs, news, video libraries, all kinds of stuff. One of those resources is specifically the ROI calculator right here, the return on investment calculator. So we're going to open that up. In here, we're now going to dig in immediately into the how do I use the ROI calculator. I'm hoping that this is going to be fairly intuitive for you, but if not, I'm going to explain some very specific things. The first selection is over here on the left. This is whether you're talking about a civil workflow, that's talking primarily civil 3D, site design, surveying, grading work, roadway work, anything in that civil space. The other toolkit here is the building space. This is talking building architecture, mechanical, electrical, plumbing workflows within, say, the Revit product, structural workflows, construction management stuff, all of that stuff that deals primarily with the envelope or stuff within a building or touching a building. That's the building tools here. So two major discipline separations. And depending on which one you choose, say I pick civil in this example for survey, grading, and roadway, if I jump over to the tasks, this list of tasks is going to be specific to the discipline or kind of industry that I'm choosing here. So we have different things like, how do I do labeling? How do I do site grading efficiently? How do I create custom legends, right? There's specific workflows, just common daily workflows that many of us do. One of them that I want to focus on is what happens right at the beginning of a project as we're first starting up. This is the converting between different kinds of survey standards. So if you're working in the civil field and you're working for, say, I live in Minnesota, so Minnesota DOT has a specific standard by which I must survey and follow with certain kinds of point codes and certain kinds of identifiers that indicate things like the edge of curbs or tree lines or things like that. They have very specific codes they use. My company, though, probably has a different set of codes that I use. And if I was to go do work for the University of Minnesota, they have different codes. So when my team is out in the field doing work, I have a choice to make. Do I let them just follow my main corporate code, the one code, and I convert it in the office? Or do I give them sheets upon sheets of different standards that they have to follow while they're in the field surveying, trying to figure out what code, what ID something is supposed to be called while they're standing in the field? Both of them have a cost. Both of them can be done, and it depends on which way is more efficient for you. But we're going to talk about how to convert between different survey standards in this example. Now, in here, there's time that you spend on a task, and I've underestimated this time, very underestimated it. Most companies are actually way more than this. We'll talk about that in a minute. How many people in your company do this on some interval, weekly, monthly, whatever? So this is actually how many times each employee does this in that interval, and then how many people are doing it. So in this case, this would equate out to 30 minutes done 10 times a week if 5 people are doing this twice a week, right? That's how this is working out. And then there is a rate down here, a billable rate. There's a couple of ways we can look at this number, and we'll talk about that depending on what you want to figure out, if it's a cost, if it's a potential what's the term, opportunity cost. Like, there's different ways of looking at this number, and we're going to let you get all of those numbers from this single calculator. And then right down below, we're going to tell you what tool we think is the proper tool from our collection that you can get at a very low cost, and what its time savings would potentially be for you on an annual basis, or what the hours savings or the potential cost savings. And you can manipulate all of these numbers. All of this. If you find you have different experiences, great, you can change the numbers. And this is true for every single one of our calculators. Different calculators have different sort of labels up here that relate to that particular workflow. And we'll take a look at a few of those in other workflows here. But first, let's just talk about this. I was talking with one of my internal team members, Tony. He's a civil specialist, did a lot of site surveying. And he said that when they would get point codes, if they got this survey from the field crew and it needed to be transitioned to a different standard within the office, he said that for him, it actually took about 3 hours on average for them to be able to do that. And that if they got one survey every single week, and the 3 of them that had to work on this had to do this particular thing, their billable rate within the office space they billed the projects was, let's just say it's $150 an hour. Well, that has an annual cost of about $70,000 in what we're going to call opportunity costs. Like, this is stuff that's not being spent on the project. It's just a cost. The company's cost, depending on what they're paying these people, let's say they're paying them, I don't know, $25 an hour. Well, if you're only paying $25 an hour, that's fine. That's okay. For those office staff, those 3 people to do this once a week, that still has a cost annually of $11,700 to do that task. If this is happening every single week and you're having this issue, $11,000 in costs. Well, if you were using a tool to automate this, and this tool could do that exact same task in 2 minutes instead of 3 hours, well, that would save you 462 hours every year across these 3 employees every single week doing this task, and it would save you approximately $11,570. That's a very significant savings on that one task that you could potentially do, and that's just talking about employee salaries billable rate. If we're talking about that whole opportunity cost of how much time this is billed to projects and how much time they're not spending doing other tasks, if we're talking about that $150 an hour billable rate on a project basis, well, that turns into $69,000 of potential costs that could be spent elsewhere or invested elsewhere in other projects. And again, it's the same number of hours because hours are finite, but depending on how you decide you want to calculate that billable rate, that's going to determine how different this number looks for you and whether you're talking about the spend or whether you're talking about that opportunity cost, right? You're going to spend your time doing something one way or another, but those 462 hours a year could be better spent and invested in project development and winning other projects and doing other project work and making a lot more in billable rate on other things than just doing this stupid task, boring task of survey standard manipulation. That same concept holds true for the field crew. If you wanted to reverse this and you're like, nah, Sean, I don't want to talk about my office staff because my field crew are the ones who are doing the task switching. That's totally great. I understand. I found out that on average, having to switch between different survey codes adds, on average, 6 additional hours extra to the actual in-field survey. And if they're trying to survey something once a week or even more, maybe they're doing more than that. Maybe they're doing 3 surveys a week and you've got 3 field crews of 6 people out there in the field and you're billing their time out at like $200 an hour. Well, that has cost, right? Like you're billing the customer for this, but that time could be better allocated and you could be doing more projects in that 5,500 human hours of time and making that money on additional projects, right? That's a thing. Or if we're just talking about their costs, survey person in the field cost, maybe you're paying those surveyors $35 an hour, $40 an hour, whatever that number looks like. If they're out in the field sloshing through mud, crawling through pits, going through the snow, that's a high dollar value skilled labor task. Those people, if they're making $40 an hour, that has a cost of them being in the field for that extra 6 hours of $224,000 a year. And that time, that money could be better allocated to other projects and winning other tasks. All of this is talking about costs that you're going to have some way or another, but if you could save that time and better allocate that time and that money to other projects, winning more projects and not losing projects because you don't have the time to do it, because 6 hours a week is a lot extra. That's almost an entire day of surveying. That's a lot of extra time that you're throwing away. Over a year, that's 52 times 6 hours. That's a lot of time. That's thousands of hours when you're talking 6 employees out there in the field walking around in these not great conditions. And if you get those guys done with their tasks faster and off those terrible sites, one of the topics we had talked about in a different thing was intangible benefits. If my field crews are happier, if they're working more efficiently, if they're able to get on a job, shoot that job and get off and be done faster, they're going to be happier. I'm going to retain their skill set longer. They're going to burn out less because I'm not making them switch between different standards and giving them headaches all the time. There's a big opportunity cost that's available there and these intangible benefits that go well beyond just the dollars per hour that I'm spending on something. One simple tool that allows you to more easily work with different survey standards has a huge savings across the firm. And the cost of this suite to be able to do this, we're literally talking like $460 or $450 for the one seat that's going to let you get this kind of cost savings. That's pennies. That's nothing, right? So the purpose of this return on investment calculator for this particular workflow is going to help you understand what the costs are, what the opportunity costs potentially are, what your time savings and cost savings potentially could be, and what specific suite and potential tool it is you should be focusing on to get that return on your investment when you get this suite. How can you get there? We're going to talk about that in a future webinar, talking about specific workflows again, but let's talk about another example. I want to switch over to the building space because I know a lot of those of you on the call today in my live webinar, you're probably building people. You're doing architecture and Revit, MEP, stuff like that. So let's talk about tasks that relate to us. Again, as I switch between the workflow here of a specific discipline and I go to the building side, there's different workflows that now make sense to me. There's a couple of them here that I'm going to highlight just in today's example. And again, I'm going to go through a lot of these one by one and talk about the tools and the workflow in detail in future webinars. But let's just talk about project startup. I talked about project startup on civil side. Let's talk about project startup to a degree on the building side and MEP side and structural side, because this is the same for all of us. This project startup, in a lot of cases, revolves around plan view creation. One task. And there's a lot of tasks within project startup, but this is just one that we're going to highlight today, plan view creation. For every single floor plan that I create on a project, it has time cost to it. I have to create the view, I have to name the view, I have to set view templates, I have to set view boundaries, I want to make sure it's organized in my project browser correctly. On average, we see that creating each individual plan or enlarged plan maybe takes 15 minutes. And maybe you're like, nah, Sean, that's silly. It only takes me 5 minutes. Okay, good for you, 5 minutes. Let's put that in there. You can change what this is. If you want to do this in hours instead of minutes, that's fine. You can do that, but you can change the different measures of time on each of these different workflows. In my case, minutes is appropriate measurement for how long it takes me to create a floor plan or an enlarged plan. Doing it manually in Revit, no tools. Now, on average, every single project that I start up, I find when I'm working on an MEP project, for example, it's got maybe 5 levels in this MEP project. Well, when I'm creating these plan views, this actually should be, I'm going to change that label, but that doesn't matter. We're just going to do this on a per year basis. Every project that I start in a year, each of those projects on average have 1,000 views, 1,000 floor plan views. If you're doing architecture, maybe you've got fewer, that's fine. If you're doing structural, maybe you've got fewer than 1,000 as well. MEP though, 5-story building, 1,000 floor plan views. That's floor plans, ceiling plans, area plans, that's enlarged plans, that's all of the plans that I need. That's design views, that's coordination views, all those floor plans, about 1,000 when I'm putting a project together, on average, right? How many projects do you start a year, right? If I start 20 projects a year and I have 1,000 views per each and it takes me 5 minutes per view, that's time that adds up. Now, maybe my office staff, maybe they're only making like $20 an hour, right? And I've got these 20 projects to start up. That's fine. That still has a time or a cost here of $33,000, give or take. $20 an hour times all these numbers, $33,000. Well, if it takes me a minute to do that, instead of 5 minutes, it's 5 times faster. That gives me a time savings of 1,300 hours per year. And that gives me a cost savings, just straight costs, straight spend on employment of $26,000. That time and that money could be invested elsewhere on, say, other projects and having them focus their time elsewhere. There's that billable cost as well. In the world of architecture and MEP, a lot of the times it's fast-paced and we bid a project and that time is cutting into my design budget that it's going to take me to put those views together. So if my billable rate here is like $150 an hour, well, that's $250,000 that I'm not allocating towards design budgets. So that same time turns into about $200,000 of design budget that I'm burning up because I'm sitting there creating views by hand if I don't use some kind of automated tool. So in this case, we're talking BIM Project Suite, and the tool that we're talking about here is the View Creator. And we already have a number of webinars on this, but I'm going to recap this specific workflow in a future webinar. If you go to our events page, you can take a look at our other ROI Calculator series and see if there's a particular workflow that you're interested in. I'm going to be recapping a number of these, specifically highlighting that tool in a future webinar. One more workflow. Let's talk about one thing. Family library correction. I've talked on project startup, sort of daily user work here so far. Let's talk about the BIM manager side. There's management level tools we have as well. In this case, I'm talking about building sort of BIM management tools, but on the civil side, there's management level tools over there as well. So on the family library correction, and these numbers here, this is based on an experience that I had relatively recently. I used to do on-site walk-around consulting. And there was this one intern who this one company sat down. At the time, they had about 5,000 families. So let's just put that number, sorry, they had about 4,000 families at the time. They have 5,000 to 6,000 a couple years later. But at the time, they had about 4,000 families. And this kid was told to sit down and look for these 25 parameters that they knew they were having troubles with that were inconsistent across their library. It was getting very frustrating for them. And so they sat him down, and in the 30 hours that this kid had spent doing the work, they got about 60 families done. That averages out to about 30 minutes per family. Opening up the family manually looking through the list of parameters, manually checking to see if it's the corporate shared parameter or not, and if it wasn't, then swapping it for the corporate shared parameter. About 30 minutes per family. Some people think that's really fast. Some people think that's kind of slow. You can put in whatever number it is you feel like doing on that. Now, I don't typically have multiple people sitting around doing this, so I'm just going to say one employee does this, maybe in a year or in a time frame, whatever that time frame is. Now, if we're talking about like intern or like, engineer in training or like whatever the term is you want to use, like that low grade, fresh out of school paid person, maybe they're getting $15 an hour to do this. That's still $30,000 in cost to go through and hand check and hand correct your library. Assuming they get it right the first time, that's a certain amount of time. In fact, the maths equal out. 4,000 times 30 minutes, that's 2,000 minutes. That's one straight billable year of time for somebody to sit down and do this task. God forbid this is a BIM manager doing this, making something like $28 an hour, or $30 an hour doing this, full time, right? Like that's probably not going to happen. Like we're not going to get that kind of time allocation. But if that was what happened, right, that's a straight spend on somebody doing something. Now there's going to be an eventual return on that investment over time, but is that return going to be big enough to justify this person, this specialized person sitting there for 2,000 hours, opening up families one by one and running that check? True story on this particular discussion with this particular individual. I was using the tool that we're recommending here, Family Processor, out of the BIM Manager Suite. And with that tool, very specifically, we set it up in 20 minutes, gave it the list of all 4,000 families and told it to run. And I walked away and continued talking to other people. And after 2 hours, I came back. Now that means, and it was done. It was done with a report telling everything that it had done already for that person. That's way less than 1 minute per family, way less. I'm being kind of overestimating or underestimating here for you so you can get a real idea of the number. That still is a time savings of 1,900 hours of time, $58,000 of spend on that. That's a return immediately. The very first time this ran, it saved them 2,000 hours and probably saved that poor kid's career, because I know he wasn't going to love that for the rest of the summer. Like that just wasn't going to work out. So, because that's a terrible task for anybody to have to do. Now, if we're talking about the BIM manager's opportunity cost and time that they don't have to then spend on other tasks like maintaining projects, and we're talking about the billable rate of the project teams where they're waiting for the BIM manager to do something, or the cost of project teams when these garbage families don't get fixed and get loaded into projects and cause time elsewhere, right? That has a much higher cost. There's also, once again, that intangible benefit that we get. When a project starts up correctly or the families themselves just work correctly, there's this intangible benefit of projects just run more smoothly and I have fewer issues overall. The morale of my design team is better about the product. Their outlook on Revit is better because it just works, because these things aren't having these breaking issues all of the time. So there's a lot of intangible costs that we can't really quantify, but there's a very tangible cost. If we're talking billable rates or even just straight, dollars per hour that I'm paying my employees, that is a cost. And for the cost of the BIM Manager Suite, which is what, $950 or $900 or something for a single seat, and that's really all you need for this, you can get that whole thing corrected in a morning while you're focusing your time elsewhere and save over $58,000 in time spent on that task from that one tool, that one time you run it. Massive improvement. So we're talking about a real return on your investment of time or investment of buying a tool that saves you time, 1,900 hours on that one task. We're talking about what that return could potentially look like. So then the question for you is kind of, what is that hurdle rate for you? What's the minimum amount of time that is required for you to actually consider this? Like, is saving $58,000 worth it to you? And saving 1,900 hours of time, is that worth it to you to spend $900 on a tool to get that savings? I mean, I would think so, but that's a decision that you're going to have to make. And the purpose of this ROI calculator is it's there for you to investigate these different workflows to allow you the ability to kind of see what are those numbers, and is it worth it for me to implement a tool like this to save this kind of time this many times throughout the year, whether you look at it on a per project basis or a full year or a weekly basis or you name it. That's the purpose of this calculator, to help you kind of figure out these numbers in a very easy and readable way. So you can present it either, see it for yourself or present it to other team members that are making decisions on that purchase. Because they want numbers. They don't want a feeling. They don't want like, hey, it feels like this tool is going to make us faster. They want to know $58,000 of savings. That's a tangible number that in a lot of cases for a lot of people is like a no-brainer decision. Okay, so let's move on here real quick. What are your next steps? There's two. One, I want you to go through that ROI calculator and I want you to look at it. And I want you to take a look at some of the workflows that you're doing within Revit or Civil 3D and see, are there workflows listed here that I'm doing manually without a tool where I could potentially save some time, a lot of time. So that's one. Number two is take a look at our events page on that same website, ctcsoftware.com, and take a look at the upcoming return on investment calculator webinars and see, are there any of these that are listed where I can actually see these tools in action for a pain point that I'm having? Like, I want to start projects up more efficiently, or I want to find out how to fix my family library better. Take a look at those events, sign up for them, and then join us again when we go through that specific workflow that has some meaning for you, okay? So with that, we're going to be done today. I'm going to say thank you. Now, I am going to jump into the questions window here in a minute, and if you do have questions about anything that I've talked about, you want me to kind of expand upon, that's great. I'll jump into the Q&A session here in just a minute. But for those of you who are going to jet, or for those of you who are watching this via YouTube in a future recording, we always want to say thank you. We always appreciate the time you dedicate to us. You're spending time learning about different workflows here, and we hope that you get a return on that spend, that you're getting time back, that you're learning stuff that's going to benefit you in the future for the investment that you're making in these webinars with us. So we look forward to seeing you in the next event. Again, take a look at our events page, sign up for those webinars. We look forward to seeing you soon.